Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here today. So we have an amazing panel this morning with those two guys changing how we map our world. I would like to start our conversation by firstly asking you why do you think it's so important for us to map the world, and how do you see this really affecting the way how people move, how people commute, how people plan transportation, so that we can have a smarter world for people to commute and to live? I would like to get from you your thoughts on why is that so important for us.
Yeah. I mean, from my side, I mean, mapping is a fundamental component needed for many services in society. I mean, just look at the beautiful maps in your slides where it was about getting from home to work or moving around the city, but also things like just maintaining the city itself and all of the infrastructure, everything from garbage collection to moving around to planning the city. It requires map data, and this is like I said before, a global problem. Everyone has this problem, from the tiniest town to London.
Yeah, indeed. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing is, up to today, building maps, and Jan was saying this before, right? Building maps has been very manual, right? So there is definitely now a phase where we're moving towards a much more automated digital way of building maps. I think this is one great progress we are seeing, and this definitely addresses then the needs that Jan was just describing in terms of understanding how a city looks like and how do I move from A to B. I think there's one component of maps that actually have been missing and are actually very important, and these are what we call mobility demand maps, right? So we have the static layout of a city, right? And this tells you how you could go from A to B given the street layout. But there's a map above that, right? Which is how many people actually want to go from A to B given the layout that is there. And when you need to make billion-dollar investment decisions, when you need to deploy your ride-sharing and bike-sharing infrastructure, you need to understand what is this demand map on top of it, right? You should make these big important decisions on where to place this infrastructure based on how people actually want to move from A to B. And the great thing now is that this has been done manually, again, with surveys. You ask people, hey, could you give me where did you start this morning? Where did your journey end this morning? And I think these new approaches allow us to build this mobility demand map and solve the big questions of how do we deploy billions of dollars building new infrastructure and new transportation services in an equitable way and addressing everybody's mobility needs.
Yeah, indeed. So, for instance, in London here, when I worked for the Greater London Authority, so I led a project that we were to map how London infrastructure is evolving. Because what happens here, like we have a project, somebody from BT goes dig up the street, 2 days later they go and dig up the street again, and then TfL comes and dig up the street. So you don't have that kind of coordination, and that really impacts how transportation systems work. Also aspects changes how people move about in the city, affect businesses and everything. So having that understanding on how cities they are growing and mapping that to get context is really quite powerful to enable us to bring all infrastructure together and to create a proper city planning. So we are talking about local and also scaling this up. How do you think the extent of global mapping should go, and what do you think that would tell us?
I mean, so the interesting thing is that at the moment, lots of these new mobility services we're talking about, like an Uber, like a Lyft, like a Didi, they are very much focused on the developed markets, right? And I think there's a big gap still in the developing markets of offering these services, right? So people are paying just way more relative to their income levels in developing markets to get from A to B. Right? They should have accessibility to these new mobility services as well, and I think that's a big gap. I think we need to understand how we fill this gap, and I'm excited about telecom data as a data source to, first of all, inform where to offer these services and how to offer these services. It's because every person by now in the world has a phone. Even if you go to some of the lower income countries, for example in Africa, even there every person has a phone, which then gives you information to what mobility need does this person have, right? When does this person go from home to work? And I think that's to me very exciting that we start to tap into data sources that are really equitable and representing the needs of all income levels of all parts of the population.
Yeah.
What do you guys? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and also when you think about extending the map into these geographies, this is also where the AI and the machine-generated component comes into play, because when you look at the top-down approaches from the mapping companies, they focus on the markets that they make the most money. So they work on Europe or North America, but for the rest of the world, we need a more scalable and faster approach to do it, and hooking up all of these data sources is, I think, the right way to solve that.
Yeah, interesting. So you talked about those different data sources. What do you think is the importance of using the wisdom of the crowds when mapping the environment? So I see, like, for instance, on OpenStreetMaps, we have a lot of people going there and trying to help us to edit maps, saying this is a route that a wheelchair user cannot take, so that we can provide better applications, not only to serve people who are not visually impaired, who are not disabled, but every single person, so that a smart city is not a commodity to serve just a small proportion of the population, but everybody.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the importance of, like, the crowds helping us to edit the map and give us rightful information about how people could move in a part of the city?
Yeah, so OpenStreetMap is a great example of that, and I think the missing component, and which is why that the OpenStreetMap solution works, is that you need to be able to fix things yourself if you want a complete crowdsourced solution to work. So it's easy to observe a problem, like here's a turn restriction that's not correct, or here's an address that's not correct. But you can report it and then trust that someone else will take that information and do the right thing, or you can fix it yourself. And I think the fix it yourself approach is the only scalable version of that. But it requires providers to open up a little bit more to crowd editing.
Indeed.
I mean, I think we're not so much in the crowdsourced data business, more in the like taking inclusive representative data. But still, I mean, my thoughts on this topic is, I think it's impressive to see how Google is able to, and to some degrees Apple, but I mean Google basically is able to fund a massive data collection effort on the basis of their hugely profitable search advertising business, right? And are kind of building the only really deep data set around mapping and all things, like, as you said, turns and images of a street. I mean, especially also the places databases. Like, I mean, so OpenStreetMap by now is in most of the areas are, because we are also users of OpenStreetMap and are very grateful to the community. We are seeing high quality in terms of like static street data, but for example, all the places information, like what are the opening times of a store, where are the store, where's the cafe. There, I think Google has a huge head start in terms of what the open source community is currently able to contribute and also willing to contribute over time. So I don't really see a clear solution to this yet, and would love to hear, I mean, Jan, how do you see this being fixed in terms by the open source community?
Well, I think your comment is correct. And I mean, if you look at any large map provider and then you take up OpenStreetMap side by side, you can actually see what geographies they are just using the open map platform as their road network, and you can see it. Like, if the roads overlap, you see it's the same, right? So you know what source they're using. But often it's the information about what businesses are here and what phone number should I use, what's the opening hours. All of that level of detail is not in a map like OpenStreetMap. And that is a difficult problem. It requires someone to be there and record that information.
And I think also Google has found this way of incentivizing the merchants themselves to keep the information up to date. So in a sense, they're going back to also to the crowdsourced approach again, right? Mm-hmm. To say like, hey, you want to be found on the web, therefore make sure your phone number and opening hours are up to date, right? So in the end, they're also using to some degree, the crowdsourced approach as well.
Indeed. So like, we understand, like, for instance, mapping is going to be very, very important for autonomous vehicles and for a lot of like emerging technology that is going to be outside on the roads. So what do you think that machines and autonomous vehicles, they need that we humans, we don't need?
Well, I mean, there are two things fundamentally that are different when you talk about maps that are going to be used by machines. One is level of detail and accuracy that's higher than what we humans need. I mean, I could draw a map for you on the back of an envelope, and you could drive according to that, and you can find your way to my house. because you're an intelligent being and you can sort of adapt to what's around you. When you're taking the driving over to a machine, the map will actually do much more of the driving than what you do as a human. The second one is frequency of updates, where you would have to get daily or even hourly updates in some areas instead of quarterly updates of the map. Because if there's a road closure or some change in the turn restrictions or drivable geometry, you need to know that immediately. You can't get that 3 months later. So those are the two fundamental things I think that need to change.
It's keeping like the veracity of the data there at all times, yes? And that's great. What are your views on this, Georg?
I think Jan very well described. I think that we need more up-to-date, more detailed maps. I think the other component that AV will bring is that AV will, in most cases, be shared. Right, so we will have mostly, at least the first wave. Right, the big AV vendors will operate as a shared model because the components are still so expensive. And I think also people just will realize it's just so much smarter to share a vehicle. Like the total cost of ownership is so much lower. And I think that when you then have by default shared vehicles, the question is how do you share them, on which routes do you share them, how do you maximize utilization, right? So the new question actually then is what utilization? It's not about what's the most shiny feature of my Mercedes, right? It's about what's the utilization of my shared Mercedes. And for that you need very, very detailed, up-to-date, real-time and predicted is very important, predicted mobility demand insights. Like demand means how many people are traveling from which place to which place at which time. And this will be a key data component to keep this utilization high, which then also keeps actually the profitability high of these shared autonomous vehicles or vans or buses.
Yeah. So you two are creating amazing technology to help us mapping the world and improve mobility. One of the things we see on smart cities is like we have to have a lot of like partnerships between like public and private. And so for instance, there are a lot of data that government they might hold that could be of importance to help you to empower more your platforms. How do you see the importance of that private, because you already do like private collaboration with telecoms and many others. How do you see like the importance of also having like that collaboration with public parties as well?
Yeah, so we actually work a lot with cities and it's easy for us to expose our data to the engineers on the GIS team that manages like street assets or something like that. It's fairly easy to expose it to them. What I worry about sometimes is how do you expose data sources like our data sources and many of the others that are out there to the larger organization of the city and make that available. Like I worry about who's going to build that tool and build that solution so that the city can use all of these sources. Because it's easy to go in and like fix a small like subset or work with a team, but how do you make the data available and accessible for the city as a whole?
Yeah, because I see like, for instance, reusing some of the tools that you guys provide can help them to speed up like planning and understand like mobility so they can improve urban areas much faster than if they were to develop in-house, right? So that kind of partnership is quite important. What is your experience on that?
I mean, we see a very, very siloed data infrastructure, basically, right? So you have cities who know about where maybe the cars run on the street. They might know where the subway runs and maybe how crowded it is or not. They have no idea what about the ride sharing, right? What is the impact of ride sharing to a city? They have no idea. Vice versa. A Uber is operating based on their own data, right? But they're operating in this bubble of their own data, what they know about the state of mobility, the same way as Google gives you a routing information that is based on the view of Google of the world, which is also, again, a very, very small subset of the total population. So there is the strong need of an orchestrated mobility across these different silos and a source of data that maps across these, an independent and reliable source to feed all these different players from a single common view of the world. And we think we're building that at Teralytics.
Yeah, that's great. One final question is about mapping assets and mapping the roads and everything that is on there, or even like underground. So one of the things that I worked before was like mapping underground assets, because we have cities being built on the top of vintage infrastructure. and that is quite challenging. And we have lots of accidents and fatal accidents every year. So for instance, in London, I think we have like 12 deaths every single year from electricity cables alone. But like, so that data is quite sensitive to be out there and also very difficult for us to collect. So how do you see kind of mapping not only the surface, but like also like improving how we can build better infrastructure for cities and to empower mobility as well?
I don't know. I don't have.
Yes. Do you see?
Well,
like,
no. You got me thinking about the cables now. I think that's like I don't know how to solve that. That's a very difficult problem, I think.
So, do you guys also work like with underground or 3D mapping? Or what do you think that is going to be something that can empower?
I mean, we do have underground coverage because in the subway stations you have cellular. Like antennas installed, right? So we do have understanding of underground. If you talk about underground, we're not bothering so much with the cables or like sewage or other infrastructure. I mean, it's all a question of a business case here, right? I mean, I would bet there will be a startup that starts mapping.
But do you think there should be kind of different levels of security access for each type of assets and things that you map on the road?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think there are definitely some assets that have national security importance, right? I think that they shouldn't be shared. But in general, I think I would encourage the cities to be more open. Right? I think that's in generally making their data available, the real-time bus locations, the real-time bus loads, the schedules. I think this is all very, very valuable information for other businesses to build on top. And so I would encourage every city to be as open as possible with these kind of data sets.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Very nice having the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.